Nigeria torn apart by war. Why does Boko Haram hold so much power in the north? And remember the schoolgirls taken at gunpoint? Over 2 years later, most are still missing. Held, it is assumed, against their will, location unknown. I'm Martin Stamford. This is Inside. Welcome to Insight. Northeast Nigeria is a war zone. Terror group Boko Haram first took over much of the region before government forces in the air and on the ground pushed them back. Caught in the middle of this are hundreds of thousands of displaced people struggling to live in improvised camps without, say aid agencies, sufficient food and water. According to the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, 134 children are dying every day in Borno State from malnutrition and a lack of medical facilities. Here's Insight's Juliana Olayinka.
More than 500 miles away from home, these young girls appear emaciated, dazed and astounded by their surroundings. Just a few days earlier, they were captors of the terror group Boko Haram, prisoners of war for more than 2 years. For these reunited families, scenes of euphoria appreciated the world over. Nevertheless, many of them are still missing. It was these 4 words, emblazoned on these iconic images, that propelled the plight of the town of Chibok, a mainly Christian village in Nigeria's Muslim-majority northeast, into the international arena.
Being sexually abused, being used as sex slaves, being used as war shields, and being used as slaves generally. You know, they have to do domestic chores in the Sambisa forest and other places that they take them to.
One of the questions that have plagued the Nigerian government in the aftermath of Boko Haram's 7-year insurgency is where exactly are these girls expected to return to? The armed conflict in the region and in the surrounding Lake Chad area has displaced an estimated 2 million people. The International Committee of the Red Cross are calling it the world's forgotten crisis. Malnutrition, diarrhea, cholera are all causing a high death rate. The terror group has made it near impossible to deliver aid to the estimated 9 million people that are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance.
Because of the insurgency, we have seen a nosedive in the food production coming from that region. That means that thousands and thousands of these people, who are especially farmers, who used to farm in that region, no longer have access to their farms. Expectedly, they are not supposed to go back to that region, considering the trauma of the abduction and possible stigmatization in that region.
Humanitarian relief can only go so far. The crisis, now in its 7th year, is crying out for international attention and political will.
And we need to take responsibility for the fact that the charities are filling the gaps of the government, which is ridiculous. They should be working alongside them. They should not be the only ones there.
Is the government right in saying it's winning the war against Boko Haram?
On one side, we have to look at the military in Nigeria and say, yes, they have achieved part of their goal. But the other side of that means that they've now taken control of neighbouring countries. So Chad, we've got Niger, Cameroon. So those people now are being pushed out, they're being displaced, and they're going into Nigeria.
For the Chibok schoolgirls and the millions of other people, both young and old, who are caught up in the conflict, there is a longing amongst them. A plea to the government that they will soon be able to return home with the opportunity to restart their lives in peace. Many are asking the federal government for help.
There should be a very good, coordinated program, like a commission that will be solely in charge of developing the zone. These are things that will fast-track development in the zone because a lot of damage has been done to the north, to the northeast. Unless an agency is established solely to take care of the developmental aspects, that will not be achieved in the nearest future.
The lives of the millions suffering in Nigeria's northeast may become the defining factor of President Muhammadu Buhari's tenure. Juliana Olayinka, reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Dr. Philip Idawar, who is the UK chairman of the All Progressives Congress, which is the ruling party's diaspora chapter. And also with us is the political commentator and former presenter with the Nigerian Television Authority, Susan Fajana-Thomas. Philip, let me turn to you first. It seems to be a horrible stalemate between the Boko Haram-held North territories and the government efforts. Would you see it as a stalemate?
I wouldn't say so at all, Martin. I think that the government of President Buhari has done tremendously well in pushing back the territories that were previously held by Boko Haram. If you recall, before this government came into office, Boko Haram had effectively declared up to 14 local governments caliphates as their territories. All of that have been taken away from them. Yes, the challenge remains massive, and that is because of the territory. We are looking at almost the entire Lake Chad district, okay, that involves not just Nigeria, but involves the neighboring countries of Chad and Cameroon especially. So it's a huge, huge, huge challenge. So I wouldn't say a stalemate. I think that the war is being won, yes, slowly, but it is being won.
Susan Fajana-Thomas, do you think it will be won in the near future, or do you think a sort of stalemate where some parts of the north will never be, there will be no-go areas for some Nigerians, will always be the case?
I think the war is going to be won eventually, but I think it is important for the government of Nigeria because Boko Haram, yes, in Nigeria at the moment, they have the government, or the military, they've been able to push them back. But that is pushing them back is actually, they're relocating in neighboring countries of Chad, of Niger, of Cameroon. So, and as long as they're able, they have the resources, they will continue to reform. The government need to get to a stage where they will need to engage with Boko Haram and bring a final settlement to the issue around that. Right, that's so what I believe.
There isn't going to be a military solution. Like so many conflict zones, eventually there's going to have to be some kind of settlement. Do you believe so?
That's what I believe. There's going to be...
We're a long way from that at the moment.
We're a long way from that, and at the same time, we're not a long way from that. It is about the government of Nigeria realizing that no conflict, majority of conflict around the world are not won by military. They're meant to get to a stage where people need to sit down around the table and talk. And I think the government has got to that stage that they need to engage Boko Haram.
But would President Buhari actually engage with Boko Haram? Do you think there are even official channels open at this stage?
I think that President Buhari has never hidden his idea that engagement is on the table. He has often said that. And I think that as things are, the forces that are or are behind Boko Haram needed to be degraded, first of all. That needed to happen before you get to the stage of talking. But, Martin, I think that we have to look beyond Boko Haram and the bigger issues that led to this conflict, first of all.
Because Nigeria was split, wasn't it? North and south. South more prosperous than the north. Poverty more prevalent in the north. Are you thinking we should address that as well?
I think that is something that the government, any government in power, needs to look at. And again, this government has already gone ahead to set up the Northeast Development Committee. You know, so they are working in that. I think they have realized, they recognize the need to deal with the poverty level.
But the government doesn't have a great track record, does it, Susan, in terms of these people caught in the middle that I alluded to in my introduction aren't really being well looked after. I mean, they're victims of a war of sorts.
They're certainly,
and they're not really got enough food.
Yeah, they're victims of war, and for a government, it is important to look after all your citizens. And these people, like you said, are cut in the middle. The government should be doing more, I believe, to engage Boko Haram. Yes, you are pushing Boko Haram back, but Boko Haram is reforming. I'm sure you know that 21 of the girls were released recently. And since that release, Boko Haram, they've been able to come back to certain areas. They've been in isolation.
Yes. And there's talk, isn't there, of another 80 or so being negotiated settlement. But it's a sort of sense, isn't there, frustration that the government is powerless to do very much, to drive very much here, because still 2.5 years on, that situation is far from resolved. So confidence that then the government will go further and rebuild the North, or energise the North, or build an economy for the North can't be very high, Philip, can it?
I mean, I think when you look at the situation as it is, rebuilding Nigeria economically is going to be a hard task. And you know the reasons why. The reason is simple. The previous government did not save for the rainy day when the oil price was really, really high. There was a time when the oil price was up to $100 per barrel, or more. That was when money was available. All of that was squandered through corruption. All right. This government is in terms of what they should do. I think that the templates are in place. I think the challenge is the downturn in the economy, and the government has openly declared that we are in a recession. Nigeria is in a recession, and I think that dealing with the humanitarian crisis in the IDP camps, in the Boko Haram held area, Nigeria needs help.
We'll continue our conversation in just a moment. You're watching Insight. Coming up, we'll have a detailed look at Boko Haram.